Hello, everyone. I want to open this space with this ceremony that came from my community. It's just a representation because it used to be led by a mamo, but in my case, I want to show you a bit how is to have that connection. My friends are going to share a column and just take one for your right hand, one for your left hand. And I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. I'm going to read something. Mama Coca. Mama Coca is ill. Much harm has been done to her. The bond has been broken. She has been looked upon with anger, fear, and disdain. Mama Coca is ill, yet on the path to your healing, today you travel from the sacred mountains of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta all the way to London, where elder brother and younger brother meet to reclaim memory and restore respect. A respectful conversation begins with an acknowledgement of our intentions. What is my purpose here? Please put your intentions there in that column.
Hello everybody, my name is Jonathan Goodhand. I'm a professor in conflict and development studies at SOAS. I'm also the director of CVAD, which is co-hosting this event with the Colombian Embassy. We're really delighted to be part of this event. This is the second event we've co-hosted with the Embassy. We did one last year with Kew Gardens on Coca, and it was a really successful event, and we think this is a really important time to be discussing these issues. CVAD, the Centre for the Study of Illicit Economies, Violence and Development, is a legacy of a program that I was leading for 4 years called the Drugs and Disorder Project, which was doing research on coca and on opium in Afghanistan, Colombia and Myanmar. And we were doing research in border regions and frontier regions of these three countries where drug economies were very important. And part of the reason for this project is we wanted to bring in the perspectives of those who are directly involved in these regions with illicit drugs, and to bring out their stories and their perspectives on these kinds of issues. And what we're trying to do is to think about drugs as being deeply connected to social issues, to social relations, to politics, to de-exceptionalize drugs. And so one of the purposes of the project and of this centre is to have difficult and problematic and challenging conversations about drugs, and to bring in voices from the margins, because it's a very important time to be rethinking policies around drugs. And these conversations need to include academics and researchers. They need to include also policymakers, but they need to go beyond that. They also need to include civil society. They need to include citizens. They need to include artists and writers. And so we're really looking forward to this event tonight.
Good evening. The Embassy of Colombia welcomes you all to this event. It is a privilege to address this audience at the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, an institution recognized for its critical spirit and commitment to major contemporary debates. I especially appreciate the presence of the university youth gathered here, as you are the ones who have the potential to transform our vision of the present and future of Latin America. Today, Colombia's cultural diplomacy is presented as a strategy that connects past, present, and future, using the coca leaf as a symbol of dialogue and resignification. Within the framework of the academic panels held tonight, we aim to collectively rethink the place of the coca leaf, not only as a stigmatized plant, but also as an essential and legitimate part of our cultural, economic, and environmental heritage. As President Gustavo Petro stated, peace is nourished by diversity, by full recognition of territories, and by dignifying those who inhabit them. This is why Colombia's National Drug Policy 2023-2033 proposes to break with the punitive paradigm and moves toward a sustainable territorial development models lawful alternatives, and the restoration of rights. In this effort, community autonomy, environmental protection, and the participation of young people, women, and indigenous people are at the heart of the transformative action. As Eduardo Galeano once said, history can still be another. And in this sense, through science and academic creation, we must imagine and build new horizons beyond stigma and war. We Colombians are tired of war, and we think that the war against drugs has been imposed on us, and we should terminate this kind of stigmatization. So help us to build bridges between disciplines, territories, and generations. Only then will we achieve for the coca leaf global recognition, not for narratives of exclusion, but as a bridge for understanding peace, memory, and life. Thank you.
Thank you to the embassy for all the effort in this joint adventure. And we will now start our first panel, The Meaning of Coca, a Cultural and Anthropological Perspective. If you can please join me, Ati, Gunnawi, Viviam, Misslin, Villafaña, an Arhuaco political scientist and climate leader defending the sacred leaf of coca. Diego Lugo-Vivas, Colombian activist and academic from the Cauca region, focused on ecological harm and environmental violence. Anthony Henman, anthropologist and author of Mama Coca, director of the Garden of Teaching Plants in Peru. And this panel will be moderated by Diego Aretz, journalist, a Colombian journalist and filmmaker exploring the ancestral, political, and cultural history of coca.
Thank you so much to all of you for being here. Thanks to, I think they're not. Okay. Now it's okay. Okay. Thank you so much to all of you for being here. Thank you to my colleagues here, Ati, Diego, Anthony. Thank you so much to Futuro Coca and to the embassy for helping us to have this conversation here. So important for Colombians, so important for the people who knows that we are living a difficult moment for this, not only in Colombia, but also in Ecuador, in Mexico, in many countries where the suffering that also the cocaine market has done is faced by families, by communities, by indigenous communities, by Afro-Colombian communities. Just to say some few numbers, Colombia has 7 million internal displaced people. We have also people from Colombia and all the world escaping the war that have been so important for our country in the last 50 years. But let's say drugs market and narco trafficking is not the only cause of this, and maybe sometimes people from the outside believes that is the first cause, but not. But indeed, it's very important, and today I want to first ask a question to all my colleagues of stories, because I'm a journalist. I just want to ask first this question: how was their first encounter with the coca plant, with the coca leaf? Because many people in the world have an experience in many different ways of cocaine, but not many have the experience of the coca. What means the coca for the communities? And I will start with Diego, because just my side. Thank you so much. And Ati.
Okay. Well, I will say that I need to start saying that I'm part of an indigenous community called Arhuaco. We live in the north part of Colombia, in the close by the Caribbean Sea, and we grow up there. We are located in 3 different departments. You are gonna see some pictures of my community there. Meanwhile, I'm talking. And we live in 3 different departments, Magdalena, Cesar, Guajira. We are around 45,000 people, and not official data, but it's an approximation of what we think. This is my territory. And what we have in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta is quite interesting because the relationship with the coca leaf start when we born in the community. The mamo choose our name, not our parents. And once it's defined, our purpose in life is established at that moment. So when the men of the community, they grew, they show that they are mature enough to receive coca, which is a big responsibility. The mamo is gonna give the coca as part of that ceremonial process, that transition of being a boy to become a man in the community. But the role of the female, the women in the community is to pick it up, to take care of the plant, and they are responsible to chewing them, to protecting her, and have that relationship. The coca leaf used to be present in our assemblies when we have political meetings. And you can see, for example, that Mamo Camilo in this area is keeping his poporo. We have the poporo, we have a white powder made of seashell that is with inside the poporo, and they are chewing coca most of the time as part of this ceremony. And when we get together in a place to start our ceremony, everyone brings their own coca, and we start sharing it, distributing them, ensuring that everyone is prepared to receive and to be part of the meetings. So I want to say that coca leaf is part of the culture. If we don't see coca plants in a settlement, in a Arhuaco settlement, it means that the culture there is threatened, is under a serious risk, because there is a direct connection between culture and coca leaf. So let's start with that.
Diego.
Well, thank you again, the embassy, Carmen, all of you for coming, and thank you for this invitation. As Carmen said before, I am from the Department of Cauca, particularly from West Cauca, from West Andes. And yesterday, when we had an event at the embassy, I started with a song of one of the most significant composers that we have from our municipality, from our town, Cajibillo in West Cauca. Today, I also want to start with a song by him. Yesterday, I started with Allá en la Montaña, Up in the Mountains, and today I'm going to start with a song that is our anthem. It is basically, it's almost like an anthem from people in the Department of Cauca. The song is called El Regreso, The Return, and I will, when we finish the panel, you will see the connections between what I'm planning to say in this song and what I'm planning to say on the meanings on the coca leaf, and particularly the role of drug policy regimes that have determined our lives. The Return. One day, after a long absence, I returned to my homeland, riding on the back of my distant memories, and when I saw the beauty of its meadows again, the blue landscape of my early years was etched in my eyes. How beautiful it is to return to my native home, and to be able to remember my sweet childhood with old friends. I have heard again the voice of the stream, the blackbird singing on the flowering crown of the myrtle tree, and in the town tower of 1,000 little bells that crowd the sky with the notes of my song. That has become basically an anthem for us, not only in the town, in the department, and it defines my relationship with the coca plant, because at the end it's a relationship with the territory that I've had in history. We in West Andes, at least my family, knew and were introduced to the world of the coca leaf as part of the peasant campesino world. And since the beginning, I have been in touch for its medical, nutritional, ancestral and cosmic relationships that particularly my family has had with the plant. But what brings me today here, more than the plant itself, is the vision of the territory. If you know something on the Department of Cauca, and if you know something on what is currently happening in the global value chain, the global cocaine value chain, and you trace a line between the two most important spots right now in production, Jamundi and Argelia, Cajibio is in the middle. So basically, my life, the life of my family, and the life of the territory of West Andes has been determined not only by the coca leaf, by the coca plant, but particularly by the stigma of the drug policy regime. And I just want to finish with a reflection in which we need to bring attention of the situation right now in the Department of Cauca. If we look at what is happening right now in 2025, Cauca is the department with the highest number of massacres in Colombia, and is by very far, the department in Colombia and in the world that kills the most social and environmental leaders in the world. With the exception of Colombia, Mexico, Philippines, Brazil, and probably Honduras, just the Department of Cauca kills more social and environmental leaders than any other country in the world. So the situation by both the system of prohibition around the coca plant and around the drug policy regime or system has basically entrapped societies like our ones in these traps of prohibition, of which I want to speak today.
Anthony, please.
Thank you. Thank you to the organizers. How do I get it? Yeah. Thank you to the organizers for the invitation to speak to you all. My role here as an anthropologist is a bit to flesh out a bit the concept of traditional use, because it is used as a catch-all phrase to describe the ways in which coca has been used in the past and up until the present. But it is not a single phenomenon. I think the easiest and best way to kind of conceptualize it is taking from my colleague in Brazil, Eduardo Vieira de Castro, who works very much on the idea of intersubjectivity, the idea that the subject, human subject, has a relationship with another species, which is not simply one of exploitation or of economic use, but involves a kind of reciprocal relationship which ends up affecting both parties. And I think this has been particularly clear in the last few years with regard to coca. It's not immediately obvious. I mean, intersubjectivity, and anyone who knows about sort of Amazonian ethnography, it's very much in vogue with regard to relationships with animal species. It's also in vogue in the field of kind of psychedelic studies, where plants are considered teachers, and there is a sort of direct reciprocal relationship between the user and the plant. In the case of coca, it's not so obvious, because coca does not produce the kinds of alterations which psychedelics do. Rather, it concentrates and makes the mind clearer and simpler, and therefore it's harder to kind of conceptualize exactly in what way humans are affecting coca and coca are affecting humans. One can always start with the kind of negative effects, which are very obvious. As eradication has taken hold, spontaneous genetic adaptations have arisen There's the case of the Boliviana negra in the Putumayo, which is a plant which is now resistant to glyphosate. Presumably before glyphosate was used on coca, which was only in the last 20 or 30 years, that particular gene was dormant and was not necessary. So in a way, kind of prohibition and the attempts to eradicate coca have actually produced a plant which is now resistant to eradication. There are many other examples like that. This is one of my best informants 50 years ago, Signora Eleonora. She was one of the first people to have her coca plants eradicated in the early 1970s in Tierra Adentro. And eradication in those days was just a couple of policemen going out with machetes and cutting the bushes down. What they discovered was that when they did that, actually the plant grew back with even more vigor, and in a couple of years, it was actually producing much more than it was producing before. So eradication actually introduced a new agricultural technique, because up until then, nobody had ever bothered to cut down coca bushes. They just let them grow. So there are many, many other examples of those kind of contradictory effects. And the campaigns against coca have, in all sorts of ways, strengthened the economy around coca, increased the areas deforested in order to produce coca, and increased the number of people who depend on the business. So the policies of prohibition have all produced precisely the opposite of their intended effect. And it seems extraordinary that after 50 years, the penny still hasn't dropped on policymakers, that their policies are never going to work, that no matter how many narco launches they bomb in the middle of the Caribbean, cocaine is going to continue arriving in the United States, and they've got to think about some other way of dealing with it. And that's where traditional use of coca leaf provides us with a very good example of how the drug can be socially and culturally controlled, both from a pharmacological point of view, because both from a pharmacological point of view, because you absorb cocaine through chewing coca, but you absorb it slowly and in very small quantities, and that produces a beneficial effect rather than a toxic effect. And it's a very classic observation of Galen and Theophrastus and Dioscorides. The difference between a medicine and a poison is simply a question of dose. So that's one lesson. The other lesson is that coca has to be subject to a certain kind of etiquette, a cultural contextualization, rituals, rules, ways in which it should be used. And finally, there's a basic ethical point, which is that it is completely mistaken to think of a substance as being bad or evil or the source of, The problem is in our relationship with the substance. And the idea of actually saying that the substance is the source of the evil is a complete philosophical mistake. And it is the basis of UN Single Convention. Nobody really questions the ethical basis to this. But anyway, returning to traditional use, what are we talking about? Traditional use extends from Santa Marta to northern Argentina. In Santa Marta alone, there are 4 ethnic groups who all use coca in slightly different ways. As you go further south, you go into the Amazonian part of Colombia, in the Valpes, all the Tucano-speaking exogamous clans which exist there. They also have, all of them, slightly different relationships with coca. The groups in the Putumayo, the Bora, they also have different relations. In the area that I know best, which is the Cauca, there are at least 3 or 4 different cultural patterns. There is the pattern of the Nasa indigenous people, there is the pattern of the Guambiano indigenous people, there is the pattern of the southern indigenous people, sometimes known as Yanacono, Huachicono, Caquiona, and there is an entirely mestizo use of coca, which evolved probably in the 17th, 18th century, but is now very definitely a pattern of traditional use. And as you go down through Peru and Bolivia as well, you know, there is a very majority kind of pattern of coca use amongst Quechua speakers and Aymara speakers. But then you finally get to the case in Argentina where it's not really indigenous at all. I mean, it was introduced by indigenous people, but it's now part of a regional identity. Argentines in the north who want to consider themselves Andean people and therefore different from the people of the Pampa in Buenos Aires have adopted coca as a symbol of their national identity. Yeah. So when you look at specific cases in more detail, you see even more variation. I'll just compare two, the ones that I have done field work in and that I know best. One is the Nasa of Tierra Adentro in Cauca, and the other is a group called the Tuyuca, who are one of the exogamous Tucano clans in the river Tiquié, which is on the border between Colombia and Brazil. First of all, they're different plants. In Cauca, it's Erythroxylum novagranatense. In the Tiquié, it's Erythroxylum coca variedad Ipadu. The plants look different, the leaves look different, and they're cultivated in entirely different ways. The plants in Cauca are reproduced by seed. The plants in the Tiquié are reproduced by cuttings. And as a result, the ones in the Tiquié are clones. There are a dozen different types, each of which has a separate name. So that's the difference of the plants. Then the difference in the preparations. Although in both of those areas, unlike in the central Andes where coca is dried in the sun, in both of those areas in Colombia, coca is dried in earthenware pots. It's slowly roasted almost. Then there's a difference in the alkali which is used. In Cauca, the alkali is made from limestone. It's a cal, it's a lime. Whereas in the Tiquié, the alkali is made from the leaf of a yarumo, secrepia, a very common tree which grows in abandoned land and is therefore quite easily accessible. Then, when you look at the use as a sort of daily stimulant, is pretty similar. It's used like for paddling a canoe or working in the fields or cutting down trees or going for long walks, hunting. But there are great differences. For example, I mean, one of the interesting ones is gender restrictions. In some areas in Tierra Adentro, most women over the age of 30 start chewing coca. Quite, I mean, they've had a couple of children, but they're not sort of post-menstrual yet. Whereas in the Tiquié, very few women ever have coca. And the ones who do are, very old grannies. Younger women do not use coca. But also there are gender restrictions on planting practices, picking practices, which are all kind of quite diverse, So there isn't, a single rule. The other thing which is very noticeable is the
Anthony,
difference in its sort of.
Anthony, just if you can, 1 minute more, and we need to ask other questions, please.
So the other difference is in kind of ritual uses at night. In the Tiquié, the ritual use is for talking, for sitting down and discussing and reciting myths. In Tierra Adentro, the ritual use at night is for sort of magic and witchcraft and healing, and involves a very complex system of señas of muscular twitches which indicate what the illness is and how it needs to be treated and what plants can be used in order to treat it and so on. So therefore, the point that I'm making is that intersubjectivity and traditional use is diverse in itself. It's not a static thing. It is evolving constantly, and the recent example in Bogota of the arrival of mambe as a sort of new fashion is a very good indication of this.
Thank you so much. 25 years ago, we had in Colombia the Plan Colombia. That was a policy created in Washington and Bogota. They never asked the communities from Santa Marta, from Cauca, from Arauca, from any of those places on how to make those policies. 25 years after, they said in 5 years, no, there will not be more coca in Colombia. Now, the last year, we have 300,000 hectares. We are the first producer in the world still. We started being consumers, which was a thing that in the 90s and in the early thousands we were not. And I want to ask Katy and Diego especially, how was this Plan Colombia lived in that communities? And how we should do different, because you had the ones who had suffered and your communities were the ones who had suffered the bombings, the displacement, the eradication that was doing with glyphosate, with Roundup, and that never works.
Yeah, this is something we can, of course, discuss for years, everything that has failed. But I want you to ask into things right now. In March 2024 is the first year. It's the first year in which, in the Convention of Narcotic Drugs, the highest space in which countries discuss the route of drug policy. In March 2024. The World Health Organization announced the formal opening of a critical review of the coca leaf, with the idea of declassify, or reestablish the value of the coca leaf, because currently it is treated at the same level with cocaine. So in March 2024, the World Health Organization proposed that critical review. And in March 2025, this year, Colombia, for the first time, challenged the Vienna Consensus established in 1961. And for the first time ever, Colombia, led by the current government, secured the first ever approval of an independent external review of the international drug control regime, which means that both cases, the coca leaf and the international drug policy regime system, both of them are now reviewed. When we analyze the situation in Colombia with more than 300,000 hectares, in Colombia grown, and when we contrast the situation, for example, in a department such as the Department of Cauca, one of the main issues that I've been trying to discuss. I don't see it in the slide, but it's okay. One of the most important issues in which we have been focused, or at least I have focused, is the relationship that we have between all the exercises around the control of the coca plant. And the different form of violences that we have experienced in Colombia. Since I was a kid, and basically I was a kid in the context of a war, I have been obsessed as an activist, as a researcher, as an academic, as a member of a community, as a part of the LGBTQIA+ population in Colombia, with different forms of violences that are forgotten even in the Colombian context of violence. Colombia is a country that studies violences, but has left aside many forms of violences. Some of those are the ones that I have mentioned here. And many of them are very related with the environment, with the territory, and with the environment. I have listed five. Toxicity associated with circular coca marijuana assemblages. Slow violence associated with failed or sabotage substitution and eradication programs. Corporate greening and new monocultures. Number 4, reproductive violence associated with aerial spraying and changes in technological packages. And finally, new illicit economies as toxic as or more toxic than drug policy. When we analyze the situation of the drug control regime and the implication it has had in the difference in the perpetuation of different forms of violences, the intersectionality between race, ethnicity, class, gender, and the environment is just overwhelming. And out of these 5 repertories of action that I have listed and I wanted to present with you, I want to focus in those in which I think we have more to do. Environmental violence. Colombia, environmental violence and the violence associated with eradication and substitution programs. Colombia is a country that excels creating programs that fails. Eradication and substitution programs are basically the epitome of those failures. And environmental violence in Colombia, at least in the context of the ecosystems I work, it goes well beyond deforestation and forest loss cover. One of the most important ideas that I'm trying to defend in the communities I work with, in the universities I visit, is the concept of environmental violence and the institutional and everyday forms of suffering and cooptation that we see in context of failed substitution and eradication programs. One of the most important aspects, and this is something that I always ask my students or the people that I speak with, when you are asked to extract, to break the cycle of a plant, such as the coca one, even if you, either if you're using it as for ancestral, nutritional, medical purposes, or as part of the coca global value chain, and you ask the people to extract the coca plant for eradication and substitution programs, you need to ask these people, what are you offering them? If you are asking them to take away the plant, something that is part of the worldview, but it might be part also of their economic system, because in most of the Colombia, that's the only viable option. When you ask someone to take a plant, when you ask someone to take out the plant that belongs to your farm, you need to think about the future of that person. And for example, if you are in front of women and collectives of women, you need to ask this question to them. Are you asking them to eradicate something that is the only minimum and basic viable economic option for these people? And in the context of failed eradication and substitution programs, if that fails, that means that you are basically taking all these women again to the most basic form of gender violence, financial dependence. Something that I said in the implementation of the National Comprehensive Substitution Program, something that actually happened. So when you are in front of these repertories of failures, you are just perpetuating a cycle, a trap of violence and suffering. And the second aspect that I wanted to discuss with you today, something that I'm very interested, and I've been working strongly in this idea, is the idea of reproductive violence associated with aerial spraying and changes in technological packages. Colombia, in 2019, we have these 2 cases, Janet Valderrama and Origineda Lape. Both cases in Caquetá and Tolima, but also for those of us that have been working on reproductive violence, we know that we have testimonies in the rest of the country: Nariño, Cauca, Putumayo, Bajo Cauca, Bichada, Meta. These two cases, Janet Valderrama and Arjoneda Lape, were the first two cases that were accepted legally in the international regime, in this case by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, in which the government is being sued for its responsibility in warning the communities that were sprayed by glyphosate of the likely consequences that this chemical was going to have, not only in their territories, but in their bodies. Dorijaneda Lape suffered a miscarriage. Janet Valderrama also suffered a miscarriage, and she died. These two cases represent a repertory of violence that extends across Colombia. The war on drugs, the prohibition system, the aerial spraying, the use of chemicals is basically a reinforced form of gender and reproductive violence. Not only in this case, when you analyze the situation of technological packages, something that I have been working a lot extensively in the Department of Cauca, and when you compared in the technological package assistance, the level of toxicity used in farms that have coca and marijuana crops, and we have been tracing these substances, and you compare those pesticides and fertilizers, and you compare the technological package basket of fertilizers and pesticides with farms that have made the transition to legal crops, you see that at the level of fertilizers, the comparison is the same, but at the level of pesticides, the pesticides used in the technological packages for legal crops is way heavier. And women, again, are way more exposed to men in the context of legal crops. There are many ways in which the whole prohibition system has environmentally and ecologically affected those spaces, and I wanted just to bring the discussion today in those cases.
Ati?
I know that we can talk about this extensively from our own perspective, but I want to be short, and I want to just put the eye on two things. First of all, I will say that the Plan Colombia was actually an important policy adopted by Colombia, but still framed under the prohibited approach that has been affecting us a lot, and we can talk again extensively about around its consequence, but I want to share an important experience. What happened when we include indigenous cosmovision, indigenous wisdom within the discussion? That's why it is important to include not only the scientific approach or even the social approach, but indigenous wisdom, indigenous knowledge into those conversations. In 2011, the Cordón Ambiental y Tradicional Sierra Nevada Santa Marta, it was a project running under the Álvaro Uribe Vélez term, and it was a project that included indigenous vision, indigenous tradition around the coca leaf. What is the coca leaf? How to deal with the increasement of coca plantains in that region, in Sierra Nevada Santa Marta, which is one of the serious an important region that export cocaine. So what happened was a really success results in terms of reduction of coca plantains. And what happened was that indigenous people in the Sierra Nevada, Arhuaca, Coquihuihuacan, Cancuamo, we were located in specific settlements that was given to us, settlements that were under important risk, and it was proven that those settlements were full of marijuana, full of coca plants, and they give it to indigenous people to prove if it was effective or not under our administration. What happened was that the MAMO said we need to cut everything. The plant that is here is not gonna work for us. The food that is here is not gonna work for us because they are already contaminated. So we started the whole process to restore the land spiritually, physically, and it was proven through the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime that those lands that were given to Arhuaco people, that were given to Kogi people, Kankwamo and Wiwa, were success to reduce the production of cocaine, and we were able even to avoid social problems around the coca plant, because around those settlements, it was full of guerrilla groups, paramilitarism, and we could even contain that kind of violence in those settlements. So that's happened when we involve indigenous people into the discussion. So this is the kind of policy that we need to evaluate to see if it's possible to replicate, to emulate that kind of models in other territories in Colombia. Because as Diego said, as Anthony said, it's quite obvious that the policy draw has failed many levels, and I want to finish my intervention. I know that we have short time. When talking about an experience that I have, and I think it was the most powerful experience that I have in my mind, I was with my father and Mamo Camilo. We were going through migration in the US. I'm not afraid to share this, and they were chewing coca leaves. They were having their coca in their mochilas with their poporos, in that white powder made of seashell in their mochilas. And I was there as a translator, explaining a bit what were our purpose in New York and everything. And they don't even know how coca leaf looks like. So we were success in our way to being into US with our coca leaf. That's it.
We have few time. I will just let the questions now, but just a final question for, I ask you to be very short in this. 1%, only 1% of the consumers of cocaine in the world lives in Colombia, even less than 1%. The problem with coca is that we don't know the numbers. We don't know really the numbers, but they say that Francisco Toomey, a very important professor in economics on coca, he says that probably more than 75% of what is coca made stays in other countries. Less than 20% stays in Colombia of the profit. So I just want you to think of this. We have the war, we have the displacement, we consume less than 1%, and we only have 20% of that economy. I think that question is very important that information is very important for me. Next question, I ask you to be short. What is the urgency, and how you see what we should do now, what we can do now, really? Like, what is our real possibility to do something? Things like this event, I really think, and I really want to say Futuro Coca and Embassy are doing a great thing opening these spaces. But for our panelists, I want to ask you what you think is the urgency and what you think we should do and we can do now to help to change this situation. Ati, maybe you can start. What you think is the most urgent thing to do, and how you think we can do it?
Well, I would say that it is important to recognize the plant. It is important to have that relationship with the plant, to reivindicate what is this whole conversation about. And the second thing is to include indigenous people into the discussion. I'm speaking English, and I will say that I can be probably the first person in my community that is speaking fully in English about such an important thing. So this is part of the elements that we need to adopt. Never replace our own language, never replace our own knowledge, but using it to share that important wisdom into our own terms. So including indigenous people is another important step into the urgent thing that we need to do.
Well, I totally agree with Ati. I think for me, it's when we recognize the importance of the coca leaf, and when we recognize the importance of the very system that sustain the coca value chain, the value chain, there is something in which I always and I'm trying to do this almost in every space in which I am. Colombia is one of the countries. If we want to make a discussion on the coca leaf and the drug policy regime in a country such as Colombia, we need to give a discussion on the immense intergenerational and collective trauma that communities in Colombia have. That discussion needs to be done when we discuss both the coca leaf and the international regime system. Colombia is a country full of trauma, intergenerational trauma, collective trauma. If we don't discuss that, we are not doing everything that we have to do.
Thanks, Anthony.
With regard to Plan Colombia, I have a very short answer. Quote Groucho Marx, whoever promotes it or defends it, I'm against it. Anyway, Plan Colombia is over now. I mean, it's had its day. And with regard to kind of moving forward, I was very much involved with the Bolivian government in drafting the request, which has gone to the Secretary General of the UN, and has now got through its first hurdle with the WHO, who have provided a reasonably positive response, saying that there's really nothing wrong with the traditional use of the coca leaf. So now we're waiting for, the ball's got to go back to the Commission on Narcotics, which meets in Vienna in February every year. One doesn't know what the composition of the, only I think 28 countries take part every year, and they're sort of selected rather randomly. So we don't really know which countries are going to be there and which way they're going to vote. But a simple majority in that 28 country committee will allow the request to then go to the ECOSOC, which is a body within the UN, and then finally to the Secretary General. And hopefully, I mean, one has to be extremely hopeful, but hopefully, coca leaf will actually be declassified. It'll be taken out of the list 1. It's more likely probably be degraded to list 2, which actually won't make very much difference. But if it were to be taken out of the list, then an international market for coca leaf and coca leaf products, like mambe, like powdered coca leaf kind of pressed together into slow dissolving pastels. I always think of it as a kind of a tube like of extra strong mints, you sort of pop them in your mouth and just suck on them. That would have a major effect on the world perception of coca, and the creation of a market which would legitimate a lot of growers and bring them into a legal structure. So I mean, we can hope and we can pray and we can have meetings like this and try and promote that solution.
Thank you so much. We have time for questions. You can just, there is one.
¿Me escuchan? Sí. My question is especially for you, Ati. I don't know if you have an idea if within the framework of restorative justice in Colombia, in the context
I'm
of...
so sorry. Can I give you this mic?
Yeah.
It's better. Thank you.
Maybe can you tell us your name also? Will be.
Okay. My name is Laura Hernandez. I'm from Colombia. I'm a lawyer in international law. I'm doing a master's degree in human rights at the moment here in SOAS. So my question is for you, Ati. And is if you have an idea if within the framework of restorative justice in the context of post-conflict in Colombia and under the integrated system of true justice and reparation and no repetition, have there been any like precedent with the specific groups or communities when where the coca has been used in healing process, or where it's mildly symbolic? And if not, do you think it's possible that could be integrated in some way? I mean, like, it's important, like, as you said, to restore it, the original meaning of coca as a sacred plant, also as an element of balance and symbol of identity for communities. So, but it's difficult because, as you said, it's still like a lot of stigmatization. So what do you think about that?
Well, to talk about the transition that we are going through as a society in Colombia, we can frame this in like many ways, but coca leaf has not even recognized as a part of the nature, or because there exists jurisprudence. I don't know how to say that in English. Jurisprudence, close. Jurisprudence around the river and how the river is affected because it's recognized as a human being, but it has not happened yet to coca leaf. It's not. We are not even close to do it, and I think that is one of the first steps that we need to do. Recognize the legal rights of coca leaf would be a dream. I mean. It will be really important to see that coca leaf is such an important element in the indigenous cosmovision. But so far, I need to explain that from Arhuaco people, from the people in the Sierra, we don't see it like the coca leaf must to be for everyone. Coca leaf need to remain in our culture, actually, if we want to chew coca leaf, we need permission. We need a whole spiritual process to start that relationship. Like, it's not common that people that is outside from the community receive it and chew coca leaf in our practices or are part of our practices. It requires a lot of time, like a strong relationship to do it. So I wouldn't say that as part of the reparation or as part of the solution would be start chewing coca leaf. Like, that's another level of the discussion. But recognizing coca leaf as a human being would be even actually part of the solution, part of the answer, and taking account that having coca plants in the settlement that we are recovering as a signal of recovering and restoration of the cultural practices can be an indicator of how alive is a community or not. So I will say that that's another way to answer that question.
Thank you so much.
There is another one. And also here then, and one over there.
You said that a big part of the economy and the economy of many of the people rests now on that expectation and that worldwide business, even though the money just doesn't make it back home. So in the event where our wish gets granted and the coca leaf stays with the people and everything, what could the economy rest on instead? What would be the alternative, in your opinion, for all of you?
I just want to say some remarks on that. During the Plan Colombia, in some communities, especially in Arauca, in the Arauca region, which is close to Venezuela in the border, they changed coca for cacao, and they did well. Right now, Arauca is selling the best cacao of Colombia, and they are doing very, very well with that. I think when you go and see also regions that produce a lot of coca are regions that normally are totally abandoned by the state. There are no roads, no schools, no universities, so. Sometimes it's also about that. No, it's not that there is no other things. No, there's a lot of possibilities in Colombia right now. We are having a fantastic moment for coffee right now, but it's expensive and it needs a lot of rural reforms. And I think those regions also are very abandoned. So I think we have solutions, we have possibilities inside solutions that we also have to create in our own country. But I think the problem is that we need the participation of the state. And that's my perspective. I don't.
I'm going to try to be very short. The very concept, the very notion of legalization and regulation behind the coca leaf and substances is extremely complicated. It's extremely complicated. It's almost like we sell the idea of legalization and regulation, but behind that, there are a lot of issues that need to be solved first. How you're going to do that? How you're going to legalize? How you're going to regulate? This is something that requires a lot of elements that I don't think I have the time here to explain or to discuss. But something that I want to mention is in Colombia, we have the idea that we can replace one product by another. So it is coca, and then if we don't grow coca, we might grow coca now legally. Let's say that we grow coca legally, or we can replace it with coffee, with cacao, whatever product we can imagine. But monetary aid, monetary support, and the very product by itself doesn't do anything. Doesn't do anything when you have infrastructural problems that have to be solved first. Education, health, and road infrastructure. Those are issues that necessarily need to be discussed and need to be invested first in order to analyze which other pathways we can take. And there is something that is very easy to forget. Monetary aid is just one of the steps in the ladder. It's actually probably one of the least important ones in this discussion.
Anthony, you want to give an answer to the question she asked to all of us?
I'm sorry, I've forgotten what the question is.
Go.
In your experience, having been there, since so much of the economy for many places rests on the production of coca, if all of this ceased and the coca was kept for the indigenous people, what could the economy rest on instead?
I'm afraid. I'm a student of traditional indigenous use, but I'm afraid the genie is out of the bottle. We are talking on the UNODC figures, 30 million consumers of cocaine in the world today. I think the figure is an underestimate. There's 3,000 tons of cocaine on the world market right now. If you divide 3,000 tons by 30 million people, each consumer is consuming 100 grams a year. Now, the most superficial sociological observation will tell you that that's not true. So therefore, the number of consumers of cocaine in the world today are probably more like 100 million, and maybe even more than that, because there are huge numbers of just very occasional users, people who pick up half a gram once a month to go to a party. They are the vast majority of the consumers. And those people could be consumers of coca leaf in a semi-industrialized form, which would be much better for their health, it would produce a much better effect, and it would support a productive economy which needs to change from supplying an illicit market to supplying a legal market. There are all sorts of advantages to supplying a legal market. I mean, from a government point of view, but also from the producer's point of view. And I think the idea that you could kind of, eliminate that was the idea behind the single convention. The theory of the single convention was that traditional coca use is going to be phased out. We're just going to phase it out. And that simply hasn't happened. And so therefore I think we have to think about not converting the crops into some other plant, but convert the cocoa which is already being produced into a healthy product.
We have time for a last question, and so sorry, but I really thank you for having a lot of questions.
Yeah, I'm Andrew from the UK, and a lot of people in the UK won't get the opportunity to actually see the plant, the coca plant itself. So I was thinking about reframing it, and just wanting to ask you what is something really beautiful or your favourite thing about the plant itself, rather than the politics around it. For maybe Diego and Ati.
Well,
Maybe Ati.
Ati.
This is how the coca leaf looks like when it's dry. And I bring it from Simonorua, which is, you can Google it, but it's a settlement that is in the Cesar department, and it's located in the middle part of the Sierra. And my favorite thing about this is when the men in my community are greeting each other, they exchange coca leaf. So if you see, I think you are gonna watch it soon, and they exchange coca leaf in a way to share what they have in their soul, in their spirit. It's a way to recognize the other person, and coca leaf is the way to do it. So if you don't know the leaf, I can give you this one.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I actually really love that kind of question, and that question. It's just when you ask, it's actually when I was a kid, I never understood all the fuss and all the coca plant, and we have in Colombia something called la mata que mata. I never understood that.
Plan Colombia.
That Plan Colombia. I never. It's for something basic. It's a plant. That's how beautiful it is. It's a plant. We are brothers and sisters. We are part of the same cosmogonia. It is as simple as that. And I think I will leave that. It is as that.
Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you so much for this. I think we.
Thank you to all the panelists. We will now hear from my colleague, Mia Pfeiffer, the ambassador of Futuro Coca here in London. And if anybody wants to contact us for something later, you can speak to her. And she is here to deliver a message from the Colectivo Yosokwi, which is an indigenous artistic collective that created the film that you are about to see, a short film.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Mia Pfeiffer. I would like to read the words from the Yosoki Collective. So here it is. The Yosoki Collective conceived this piece especially for the first edition of Coca Talks here in London. The collective is now doing fieldwork in Colombia and could not be here with us, but here are their words. After asking ourselves the big question, if Coca could talk, what would it say? Reborn was born as an audiovisual piece inspired by the origin of Coca from the worldview of the indigenous people of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. This short film seeks not only to understand the origin of Ayu, Coca, but also to recognize that it is alive, that it is sacred, that it is a channel between the earth and spiritual knowledge, and it endures to continue sustaining life. The Yosoki Collective, the creators of this film, have established themselves as one of the most important exponents of indigenous cinema in Colombia, linking audiovisual communication to the defense of the territory, the linguistic and cultural revitalization of the Arhuaco people, and the strengthening of ancestral memory and thought. Please enjoy the film. Sorry. Could you please turn off the lights?
igwin kabori. Eki senzare, igwian gwe puran nani. Nan gwe ati nani. Kat nan jeka nagi kwanani. Nak zai sagana seta ni kuja chulungas no nawani. Dia sering apa pun tak kweri, kapu nari kaure sinu nawani. Imeyawi gujo kui weka jumi sinu nawani. Hemei zori gontik manari. Nazajuna nan jekari, visi jongwa se kori gana se kchuk mazojanani. Aku tahu tima kazagichi, jui kazagichi zori kweli. Ajumaku diwan zari zojek na kachu zempanani. Na gacheri kanzachi, kanzakuku, avir zajuna na kaninani. Imeya vigonti garunga, aviri ga kanamu keuni nawani. Na zajuna zi kawani. Juanari kawi, ambori zojaigui, kuize kweka kwasi zojinogani. Na zitinzi kweka, bonzi kaunogani, jenzana kawi. Na sinvinsirun sunogekari, azach sedi, na zana, chikiru vin kaunogani. Jo tingu, avir juasimi, ankrigan kuno kwani. Ei mazanzana nari, mukriwa jensin vinde no kongwas no kwani. Ei kiguiti kuma uginari, jaman. Ikse guna kanari, kaka inisi, zijse pansi, eki na ino kwanin. Eki gui kakse re nisi ze ino kwanin. Eki gui mia jina rivina jansi, iva dikin kanika ze kwa bata na no kwanin. Aviri geisi ngarin kamsiwe ri. Nakawi kanan tak makewo bani. Eya no ve kineka, ingunari, juak senang kwek na ngozojaki no gani.
Shu yakvin, shu nani ko yakvin, lahi soka ko yakvin. Wakahikimi menaka wakanakleshi ite, wakasanyo ko joko. Hin kakapana wani nadaki ahin. Azinaz ekimiga ekinye kangwi meio dia na toka ai ya si tu singi kami kunya ka saka tadi nak ya te koka nak da koka lina nak da hi ka di ta kwa nak da ki bagi sakit nak gabya ka anti da hi na kwen di kenu ka kai ka di kenu ka nak da ya nak ni nak ka tinada
Nang di kanjuna ga kanamarung kway ka na nukwani. Zaku zabugumo. Ano gue duna. Zakino kway ka na kanta kamagui. Adjun na kachwagu. Makaiwa bunsan. Tui kawa bunsi kawa. Zik kawa sinsi kumaneko. Ukminja ne na ukmanki. Yingu na kanta sabu. Zaku me kawa nuga bapari minga vurawagu. Jueju nari. Tezanisi zai kweku. Ni mran saviri. Mokami ze na neka ni kachogu. Nangan gwere. Bemas jumni kisau kina neka na ide. Na pausika na mi na kinkewani. Na zai konseri kumam kana na gunande. Azne minde basa ne kumanke. Aze arunga ze kweka. Me zan ze kwekasim. An gwekim nari. Dinga nisa vezani. Eyunajuri. I bitinzi zornizani. Chowa zana nugekari. Richu nekani. Eigun kabori avnuga neka. Iva nugani.
Thank you for watching. Super exciting. This is the first time that the film is, well, we shared it yesterday in the embassy, but this is the first time that it's shown in an academic audience. It's a film that was made for this event, so yeah, very exciting that it was able to travel. It's another way the coca leaf travels. And for our last panel, I'm going to call the intersections of coca with drug policy transformation, indigenous views, and environmental justice. Clemmy James, human rights and environmental justice campaigner, co-founder of the International Coalition. Jenna Rose, Maori researcher from Aotearoa, advocating indigenous-led drug policy and environmental justice. Steve Rolls, senior policy analyst at Transform, advising governments on global drug policy reform. And this panel will be moderated by Dr. Jenny Pierce, political scientist, professor, and peace anthropologist, award-winning scholar of Latin American politics.
Well, welcome everybody to this second panel. We've had a wonderful first panel and a film, and I think the conversation is very connected in this panel to the last one, because this whole discussion has to open us up to what I call resetting the conversation about drugs. And I first began to get a real sense of that when I worked with Jonathan Goodhand on the project he mentioned earlier, Drugs and Disorder, in which we worked in Putumayo in Colombia, but also in Myanmar and Afghanistan. And we realized that this issue is a global issue, right? And that a very important aspect of it, to see its global nature, I think, is, and how we can reset and rethink how we talk about it, and what policies could best be used to actually address something which has ended up, as was said in the first panel, with a horrendous amount of violence and a horrendous amount of suffering, and we need to really rethink what's happening. So I'm extremely happy to have this panel, and we're going to take the conversation a bit further. The coca leaf is still at the centre of the discussion, but we're also going to link it to the policy environment which has made the coca leaf an illegal substance and often conflated and confused with cocaine. And so we want to sort of look at the issue of the coca leaf in its environmental, ecological basis, as well as in the debates around what we can do. So we're going to start off with Clemmy James. Already, I think we've introduced her. She's Senior Policy and Campaigns Officer at Health Poverty Action. And I think she's going to help us to address, why do we go to war with a plant?
Great. Okay. I'm going to stand and click over here. Click. Okay, great. Really nice to be here, and it is a real honour to have made friends with the coca leaf and Colombian colleagues and friends who have a deep relationship with the coca leaf. But as a British woman, I'm going to talk to you about systems of oppression. Just to make it jolly tonight. No, I'm gonna try and zoom out a little bit, because I can't speak really to the coca leaf, but I can speak to you about why I think the UK and Europe should be doing more as allies to our Colombian colleagues. I'm just going to open this water because I can feel I'm like going to be very dry mouth. So, Diego, some other dear friends in the room, set up something called the International Coalition for Drug Policy Reform and Environmental Justice. And we did this because these two sectors, drug policy and environmental justice, do not talk to each other. And they are not advocating for each other's needs, and yet the success of both of their agendas require both of them to work together. Okay, so we believe in reforming drug policy to restore rights and recover nature. So, prohibition, it's important for us to think of it as a system. It is a system of economic and political harm. And it's been understood for the last 30 years as a system that helps control certain communities, communities of colour, indigenous communities, poor communities, through over-policing, through mass incarceration, through targeting these communities and criminalising them. But today I want you to start thinking about drug policy as a system that enables extractivism. And that links it directly with the current climate crisis that we're in today. So the so-called war on drugs was designed by the global north. It's a colonialist imperial system that we have exported around the world. We've stopped Jamaicans using their plants. We've stopped Colombians using their plants. It is rubber stamped every single year in Vienna by the UN. It is the UN, the same UN that upholds human rights, public health, that maintains this idea and has this vision of a drug-free world. It's the UN. So the same UN that's trying to support climate change, prevent climate change, is actually peddling the drug war. And this is important. This is not some side hustle. The UNDP have just named it at $1 trillion, the drug economy. So it's a significant part of our entire world economy. It's a huge pillar of how institutions and countries function. And that's enabled by drugs, by prohibiting drugs. So when we make something illegal, doesn't matter whether it's abortion, sex, drugs, we push it underground. The desire, the need does not disappear. We are creating an opportunity overnight by making it illegal. We're inviting people to step in and meet that demand. And that is what happened when in the 60s when we prohibited these plants. We created an economy. And that economy means that the way we police drugs is that the police and the military play a really critical role in that economy. And the best way to think about it is if Jenny is the police and you guys are London and half of you run half the city's cocaine economy and you run the other half of the city economy, the cocaine economy, you guys are going to very likely put some of your profits into corrupting Jenny so that Jenny takes down this side of the city. And all that happens when Jenny has put a picture up on the Daily Mail or something, said X amount of cocaine has been taken, all that actually happens is that this side of the city takes over that side of the market. So by policing drugs, we are creating monopolies. We are creating groups, cartels. We are creating economies that have power and have resources, and they infiltrate the police and the military to make them more powerful. Corruption is a key asset of the drug economy. So drug prohibition creates these prohibitionist landscapes, and that's what we need to start thinking about them when we think of ecology and how it interacts with the environment and social and economical fabric of our society. It's not always obvious, but it's embedded within the dynamics. So why is drug policy connected to the climate crisis? So on one level, when you're in the climate space, we know that one of the things that are most important right now is for us to protect our forest cover in the planet. And the forests that are most capable of capturing carbon are along the tropics. So despite Canada and Russia having the largest forests in the world, the forests that actually can capture carbon at the rate that we need them to do so are along the tropics. So in the climate movement, the focus is on tropical rainforests. The Amazon, for instance, at the moment is a huge, huge area of focus of protection. But the other thing that runs right along the tropics is the world drug economy. So there is an overlap between the regions that we are trying to protect and save and a thriving $1 trillion economy. Now, do we hear Greenpeace talking about this $1 trillion economy that is running riot in the very regions that they are trying to protect? No, we don't. And this is why we as allies in Europe need to start breaking these taboos and start talking about this drug policy as an economic issue that is standing in the way of protecting these critical, fragile ecological regions. So I'm going to just take us through quickly, because I know we don't have very much time. I'm going to take us through 5 ways drug policy, the system of prohibition, clashes with the environment and climate justice. Firstly, if your product is something that you're going to get criminalised for growing, you are not going to be able to grow that out in the open. So it doesn't matter whether you're growing coca leaf or tomatoes. If you're criminalised for it, you're going to do it in regions that are covered. So whether that's jungle regions or fragile forest regions, you're going to push that. And what happens, as we heard from Diego, from Plan Colombia and other eradication programs, they eradicate your plant, you move further up into fragile regions. So we've got this like cat and mouse game that is happening all over the tropics. So drug production is being moved into critical frontiers. Next, the way that we fight the war on drugs directly impacts the environment. So we are aerial spraying, we are sabotaging the plants, we are removing the plants. When you're creating cocaine, there's no bin that says, please put this product here and we'll take it away on a Monday. No, you just discard it in the river. When you come along and you disassemble the laboratory, they just blow the laboratory is blown up. There is no mechanism of protecting the environment that this economy is sitting within. And this is a particular area that I focus on in my work and the coalition, is the financial systems of money that is washed or laundered through other environmentally extractive industries. So when you have so much money, you can't just take it to the bank, you're going to reinvest it into other illicit economies. So illegal mining, deforestation, cattle ranching, people smuggling. The bank that you're going to use is the cocaine economy, because it is available and it needs to be hidden. And what's good for business is diversifying your business. So you will always reinvest your money in other illegal economies, sometimes legal too. But the vast speed at which extractivism is happening in Latin America and other parts like West Africa, Central Africa, is because of cocaine money is being invested into these critical extractivist industries. So drug profits are used to corrupt governance and public infrastructure. So when Diego was saying, before we can even have a conversation about legal regulation, we have to have strong public infrastructure. We have to have health systems. We have to have schools. We have to have transport systems. We have to have emergency housing. When we start thinking of climate justice means how do we protect the most vulnerable in society? We sort of got a glimpse of what that looked like during COVID. How is the government going to protect the most vulnerable? Well, it's incoming. The climate crisis is going to require governments to protect the most vulnerable. What situation is that government in to protect the most vulnerable when their greatest assets are corrupted, when their police force are corrupted, their judicial system is corrupted, when the money is being diverted out? It weakens the governance. So even though we're not saying that the governments are amazing entities in themselves, they aren't able to be responding to what their communities need, because ultimately there are these other groups that are, in many situations and many occasions, more powerful than themselves. So corrupted officials, whether that is the local mayor or whether that's a port authority who is going to be corrupted to enable the smooth running of the trade, when it comes to designing policies and urgent climate policies around protection of forests, around emergency housing and food systems and water systems, are they going to be designing policies that protect the most vulnerable? Or are, because they are already corrupted by the trade, they're going to create policies that enable the smooth running of the trade? And that's why we're seeing highways right through the Amazon, because the thing that's coming in and out of these highways is cocaine and logs. It isn't money being spent on public infrastructure. And finally, and Ati, I'm sure, can speak to this far more than me, is the impact on environmental land defenders. Environmental land defenders are speaking about these inter-crossfire issues, and we aren't talking about one of the major intersectional issues of drug policy with all these other areas. And so by the global north not speaking about the power of the drug economy on the front lines and how it's impacting our ability to protect these forest regions means that we're laying more weight on the shoulders of those who are standing up on the front lines. How long have I got?
Yes, you're actually fine. You've got 2 more minutes.
Okay. So our coalition, which there are members in this room, has started off as a working group with Jenny over there about 3 years ago, a small working group, about 5 of us with Diego. We're now over 100 people from all over the world on every single continent. We're artists, we're people who work in policy, we're filmmakers, we're advocates, we're researchers, we're students, we are professors, because we have understood that we have to collectively retell a narrative, retell a story about how ecology, how our current vision of protecting the world that we live in cannot go hand in hand with being at war with a plant. And we need to destigmatize this conversation. We need to force the NGOs, force governments, and invite the public to understand. I really think the public is way ahead of this than the politicians tell them that they are. But we need to change the narrative that drug policy intersects with all the major areas that we all probably focus within the social justice space. But in particular, if we want to protect these forest regions, we will not be able to do it when there is a multi-billion-dollar untaxed unregulated economy thriving in these regions and causing the level of violence and reducing community resilience, which is absolutely critical to meeting the climate crisis face on. So finally, Jenna Rose, Steve, myself, and 5 colleagues in Brazil and Colombia are heading to the COP, and we're launching a report called From Forest to Dust, and it is the story of coca and cocaine from Colombia, Brazil, as it hits West Africa and comes to Europe. And we're telling the story, and with research, with evidence, about how these two crises, the war on drugs and the climate crisis, are colliding, and we have to talk about them together. Drug policy reform has to be central to the climate justice negotiations and conversations moving forward. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think that point of linking issues that often we talk about separately, like climate change and drugs, is absolutely vital to what we're trying to do. So now I'd like to introduce Steve Rawls, who's a Senior Policy Analyst for Transform Drug Policy Foundation. And he's going to tell us about the overlaps of policy on coca and cocaine and other things, I think.
Yeah, so there's often this theme that cocaine and coca are separate, and in terms of their behaviours and using cultures, of course they are. But there are, in terms of policy and law, there are also overlaps that we can't ignore. Obviously, cocaine is extracted from the coca leaf, and the coca leaf, if there is an intersection, it is essentially driven by the war on drugs and prohibition, because prohibition captured coca in its dragnet. And the war on drugs, specifically the war on cocaine, led to coca leaf and all the traditional practices and culture associated with it also being criminalised by default. And I don't think we can address the issues around protecting indigenous rights and traditional coca culture and develop a meaningful coca culture going forward without addressing the issue of the war on drugs, specifically the war on cocaine, because, you know, if we don't deal with the war on drugs and the war on cocaine, you know, there won't be any Amazon left, as Clemmie so clearly expressed. You know, if the environment is destroyed, if the national parks and indigenous reserves are levelled, this becomes an academic discussion. So if we are serious about dealing with the issues of coca, we do also need to deal with the issues of cocaine. And if we're talking about the war on drugs and prohibition of cocaine being a failure, we have to say, well, what is the alternative? And the alternative is a legally regulated market for cocaine and coca products. And that's a very difficult idea for people to get their heads around, but we need to remember that you have two options. You either have a legally regulated market for cocaine and coca products, or you have an illegal one. And we leave it with all the chaos and destruction and cartels and violence and all that horror, environmental destruction that you're all very familiar with. I mean, I don't need to tell you the story of the failure of the war on drugs. It's there for all to see. There's no third option in which we win the war on drugs and coca and cocaine just disappears. That's just not an option. It's never going to happen. We've been trying for generations now to get rid of cocaine, and the market is bigger than it's ever been. More people are using it. Like Anthony was saying, about 70 million people probably are using cocaine every year around the world. A lot of them are in England. It is funny, but also there was the data was out today from the ONS on drug deaths, and there were 1,200 cocaine-related deaths in the UK. It's the highest number ever. It's gone up by 12% since last year. Tenfold increase since 2011. So in 1993, I think the first year there was any data, there were 9 cocaine-related deaths. This year there were 1,200. Now, is that a success of the war on drugs? No, you could hardly imagine a more grotesque failure from a public health point of view than, you know, the exact opposite of every metric that you're supposed to be achieving. You know, the market's expanding, organised crime are getting richer, chaos around the world, destruction, violence, addiction, death. I mean, it's not a happy story. So the idea of exploring pragmatic alternatives where you regulate that market because it's not going anywhere, we have to have that discussion, and that has been the focus of a lot of my work and the work of Transform over the last few years. And sorry, that was a really lengthy introduction. I probably only got about a minute left.
No, you're okay.
I've only got a very brief. This is like a 300-page book, and I haven't really got time to go into it all. So I'm going to give you a very, very brief overview. These books are available online. You can buy them in print, but you can also just read them online. Please do. It's coming out in Portuguese next week and French next week as well. So it's available in various languages. Obviously, cocaine, as I've already alluded to, it's not a single thing. Coca leaf, cocaine powder, crack or pasta base or bazuco, they're the same but different. You know, they all contain the cocaine alkaloid, but they're associated with incredibly different using behaviours and using contexts, and a spectrum of risks. So coca leaf is and in terms of regulation is all about managing and reducing risk. So different products would be associated with different policy models. You wouldn't regulate cocaine or crack in the same way as you would coca leaf, obviously. So we have to be a bit more sophisticated. And we've advocated for a sort of three-tier model, a light touch model for coca leaf and coca products that would be similar to coffee or sort of energy drinks. A very strict pharmacy sales model for adults only, rationed amounts, a government-controlled monopoly for cocaine powder, but it would be a retail model, but there would be a lot of restrictions and controls around it. I can go into a bit more detail about that, and there's obviously a load more detail in the book, so you'll forgive me for rushing through this. And then we don't really anticipate a retail or regulated retail market for crack or injected cocaine or pasta base, which is a sort of Latin American crack similar. I can't be asked to explain it right now. But it's like crack, but worse. We don't anticipate a retail model for that, but we would have a harm reduction approach. So you would have supervised use, you would have perhaps some innovative prescribing. There are various models. You would approach it as a public health and harm reduction issue, but you would decriminalise possession and use. Something that Anthony touched on is I think there may be some space for products that sit somewhere between the coca leaf chewing and cocaine powder. Things like snus-style pouches with coca leaf in, things like the oral lozenges that dissolve in your mouth, possibly Red Bull-type energy drinks. There are various other things that we could be exploring that might be able to eat away a bit at the market for cocaine powder. And as Anthony also rightfully pointed out, the Coca review, should coca leaf be descheduled, might open up space for some exploration of those products, but it certainly wouldn't for cocaine powder. Cocaine powder production, on the left here, this is legal cocaine that is produced legally. The coca leaf is grown in Peru under a state monopoly. It is shipped by the DEA to Stepan Chemicals in some deep south state, I can't remember which one. And the cocaine is taken out and sold onto the medical market. Most of it goes to the UK. Again, I've no idea why. And then the leaf with the cocaine removed goes to the Coca-Cola company to flavour Coca-Cola. So there is already a legal market for cocaine that exists, and it's not associated with any cartels. There's no rainforest being cut down. There's no violence. There's none of the horrible shit that you hear about with the illegal cocaine market happens with this medical cocaine. It's really small market. It's less than 1 ton. So 1 ton compared to 1,200 tons or whatever the UNODC is estimating now, it's obviously very small, but it's a proof of concept. It's not that difficult to make cocaine legally. We produce all kinds of medical plant extract-based drugs. We have, in the book, we go into things like licensing and vending and outlets and tax and pricing and packaging and potency controls and warnings on the packaging. We mocked up some what legal cocaine might look like, and it basically looks like a pharmaceutical drug because it is one. And you would have warnings and dosage and all the kind of things that you would get. It wouldn't be branded. You wouldn't have football teams being sponsored by cocaine brands, all the stupid shit we have with alcohol and tobacco. It would be very responsibly regulated in a way that didn't promote it. It wouldn't be profit-driven. It would be a state monopoly. We think that's preferable to the carnage that we have now, because either way, loads of people are going to be doing coke. That's just, you may not like that. You may hate cocaine. You may hate people on cocaine. I generally do hate people on cocaine because they're really annoying. But the fact is there are lots of them, and that, as policymakers, that's the reality we live in, and that's the reality we have to deal with. And we have to manage that reality in a way that doesn't destroy the Amazon, fuel conflict and corruption and violence across the globe. A few things that we need to be thinking about. We need to learn the lessons from alcohol and tobacco. I've already alluded to this. We need to not have profit-driven commercial markets where there's incentives to recruit users or increase use. This is why we think a state monopoly is a very good idea. Complete marketing ban. No advertising, marketing or branding. Obviously, there are tensions between public health and profit, and I think a state monopoly goes a significant way to removing some of those, addressing some of those tensions. We need to avoid the things that have happened with alcohol and tobacco: commercialisation, consolidation of markets, the emergence of monopolies that can distort the policymaking process through the process of corporate capture. We need to not do that. We need to learn from alcohol and tobacco and do better. We need to build in social justice from the start. I haven't really talked very much about this stuff. I think I'm going to leave this to Jenna because she's coming back to this stuff. But we need to not recreate the iniquities of under prohibition, under a regulated market. And obviously we need to have people, impacted communities need to be intimately involved with the process. There's a lot more on the book, and Jenna's going to be talking about this in a moment. There are some interesting things going on in the real world. There are some innovative cocaine prescribing for people who are dependent on cocaine. So there are some sort of legal prescribing, safer supply models emerging. There was a bill in the Colombian Senate in 2021 that was actually, Transform did some work on it. We fed into it, had a 3-tiered model. It was all very, very sensible. It was doing quite well. It won some votes in the Health Committee, but it fell because there was an election. But one of the senators who was backing it, voted for it in the Health Committee, was this chap, the lovely president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, who was, maybe not so much on the delivery, but certainly in terms of his narrative and public discourse, he's been very open in his critique of the failings of prohibition, the war on drugs, has openly called for exploration of alternatives to prohibition, and has been a great leader. In international forums, as Colombia has indeed been generally in terms of taking the debate forward on, challenging prohibition and challenging the failures of the international drug control system. This was a piece in The Economist. Joe Biden is too timid, it's time to legalize cocaine, which the next day was tweeted by Gustavo Petro, the president. This is the debate moving to the highest possible level. This is the president of Colombia tweeting a piece about Joe Biden needing to legalize cocaine. I mean, it is no longer a marginal issue of discussion. Very, very briefly, there was a Truth Commission, part of the peace process, called for an exploration of the legalization and regulation of drugs, and encouraged Colombia to lead that. So, with the legitimacy and strength that comes from being one of the countries that suffered the most from the violent consequences of the war on drugs, this is a sort of legally binding process. I mean, the Colombian colleagues could speak more to it, but this is an important moment, I think, that the Truth Commission, part of the peace process, identified prohibition as a driver of conflict. This is the, I'm not going to go, I'm running out of time. This is Volker Turk. He's the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the UN, calling for the legalization and regulation of all drugs. This was another big moment, an institutional moment, the lead UN agency on human rights calling for the legalization and regulation of all drugs. In a document, in written recommendations, consider developing regulatory systems for legal access to all controlled substances. Point 3 there. Take control of the illegal drug markets through responsible regulation to eliminate profits from illegal trafficking, criminality and violence. The lead UN human rights body calling for the legalization and regulation of all drugs. Amnesty International, the leading human rights NGO in the world, called for, after a 7-year process, called for the legalization and regulation of all drugs. Beautiful document. Both of those, the High Commissioner's report and the Amnesty International report, please do read them. They're really brilliant forensic examinations through a human rights lens of the war on drugs that make a series of pragmatic calls, including legalization and regulation, responsible regulation of all drugs. I've run out of time.
Yeah,
where are we now? Well, we need to have a chat about, we need to take this forward. And, the very final point, the UNDP has just published this report called The Development Dimensions of Drug Policy, which is a detailed exploration of the legalisation and regulation of drugs through the lens of the Sustainable Development Goals. And there's a lot in there about Colombia, a lot about cocaine. There's some case studies of Bolivia, mentions the Truth Commission. There's a case study on Colombia. So please do read that, not least because I wrote it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I just want to mention something from my own research, which we've talked about violence and its connection to all of this, and obviously the social leaders, environmental leaders that are killed, the impacts of the drugs on health, etc. I just want to mention the young men who get into the actual trafficking, and the number of them who are dying, right? And there's a statistic in Latin America, there's a 1 in 50 chance of dying before you reach 31 if you're a poor young man. And that is connected with this. So there's so many aspects to the violence that's kind of a part of this. So finally, I want to ask for Jenna Rose Astwood to come, who's an Indigenous Maori researcher and advocate, specialising in Indigenous value systems, Maori customary law, and the impacts of colonial legal frameworks. And since 2022, her focus has expanded to drug policy reform and the advocating for Indigenous rights in global forums and advancing Indigenous-led responses to social environmental challenges. And so she's going to talk about the ecological harm reduction. Sorry, she's over here.
I'll be over there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jenny.
To the ancestral river, from the mountains to the sea, connecting to the lands, I am the river, and the river is me. And it's very important that I start with this traditional greeting. I am Indigenous Māori from New Zealand. And today, speaking here, I'd like to thank the Colombian Embassy and Futura Coca for hosting this event. It's a privilege to be here and to speak with you today about ecological harm reduction. So as my colleagues before and the panel before mentioned some very important issues, how are we going to do this? How do we move forward? And actually, just one more thank you to everybody here who's 8:10 on a Friday evening, who could have chosen other plans to go to. I appreciate that you are still here to hear about this super important topic. So, ecological harm reduction. What is this? Did I make it up? A little bit, but not really. Okay, so why ecological harm reduction? Well, as my colleagues have talked about before, a war on drugs is also a war for drugs. The war for drugs incentivizes illicit industries to enter into these economically illegal practices. And the environment are the ones that are having the biggest impact. The environment is having a profound impact by these illicit extractive activities. And the people that are impacted the most socio-economically are the Indigenous demarginalised communities that are facing the brunt of being systematically trapped in the drug chain system. And so what's really important is that we also have to think about the impending drug markets and how we can ensure that plants and fungi are not going from one system of regulation just to be trapped in another and to be alienated from those especially traditional communities in which those plants and fungi are an important part of their cultural, socio-economic livelihoods. So ecological harm reduction aims to look at all of these aspects, the environmental aspects, the socio-economic aspects, and put together a framework that addresses all of these challenges in drug reform. So, what is ecological harm reduction? Okay, what it does firsthand is it recognises the rights of nature to thrive, and that a thriving environment is for the benefit
of human and non-human communities. And what ecological harm reduction wants to do is it wants to install ecological rights, looking back to kinship ideologies of ecological interdependence, removing the objectivity of nature and replacing it with subjectivity, recognizing that nature has a subject of rights and should have mechanisms, legal mechanisms, to uphold and protect itself from being objectified. And a part of ecological harm reduction, in turn, wants to also integrate this ecological rights with socio and economic policy and regulation that addresses the inequity and inequalities that have been created by prohibition, especially to those communities that are disproportionately harmed by prohibition. And it's important, especially considering we're having these conversations about the impending legal regulated market, as my colleague brought up with cocaine. We have to ensure that ecological harm reduction is a guidance system, ensuring that there are safeguards and there are protocols and risk management in impending industries. Am I talking too close to the microphone, guys? You can tell me. You can tell me. Okay, so let's look at the rights of nature. The rights of nature is a big part of ecological harm reduction. It aims to be the core framework. The rights of nature comes from often indigenous ideologies of kinship connection to the environment, which we call ecological interdependence. And during the imperial imposition, these kinship narratives were mythologized, removing the subjectivity of the environment and replacing it with objectivity so that we could exploit the environment. This idea of dominion over, taking away from the kinship narrative of connection and relationship. The rights of nature movement is a very strong force, and it establishes ecological independence, which we need to bring into an ecological harm reduction framework. The idea of rights of nature has existed a long time, but it kind of popped up in the academic sphere through this book, Should Trees Have Standing, in 1972, when the author questioned, should we give rights to trees and rivers to defend themselves in the court of law? In the very same year, it was recognized in the court of law that trees and rivers should have rights, and that humans can act as guardianships, very similar to how we have legislation with children, to be able to stand on behalf of nature and uphold these protective mechanisms. And the rights of nature was first installed in legal frameworks in Ecuador in 2008 in its constitution, and it has then been installed into further constitutions and further legal instruments in Bolivia and in New Zealand, my home country, where we have utilised the rights of nature framework in 3 pieces of regulation to protect river systems, mountain systems, and forest systems. And I think it's really good to talk about some of the examples of how the rights of nature have actually been applied. So they've been applied in Colombia when there were extractivist activities that were causing extreme environmental damage to the Villicomba River. And by applying the rights of nature, the ecological rights, they were able to stop those activities from happening. We have examples of how the rights of nature were utilised in court to stop illegal mining activities from impacting systems, specifically quoting that the ability for nature to thrive was imperative for the rights of communities to thrive as well. And in particular with drug reform, I've put that example right down at the bottom. A community in Mexico were able to utilize the rights of nature in the direct mining licenses given out by the government in very sacred areas in which they grow peyote, which is a prohibited plant. And they were able to stop the mining from happening. The injunction is actually still ongoing in court today. And so if they were able to apply the rights of nature through the ecological harm reduction framework, I would, well, I can't say 100%, but I would definitely say it would likely cease this activity, not just pause it. So how can we look at the legal frameworks that we can bring into ecological harm reduction and drug reform to actually achieve this? We have to look at the 3 international treaties that are currently doing their best to uphold the biological rights of the environment. The first one is the Convention of Biological Diversity, and what this really focuses on is the conservation and sustainable use of the environment. And then we look to the Nagoya Protocol, which is its supplement paper, and this really focuses on free, informed participation and consent and access and benefit sharings when people want to utilise plants that have associations with traditional use. And I think this is really important, the Nagoya Protocol. It has been applied in many cases, such as in South Africa, where the Nagoya Protocol has been utilised to ensure that the Sands community are able to get rights and benefits from the use of the rooibos tea for their connection of traditional use. And then we look at the upcoming WIPO Treaty. This was only done last year, but it's super important because it puts in disclosure and transparency mechanisms and patent application. So if you're going to attempt to utilise traditional knowledge or a plant that's associated with traditional use, you have to disclose that, or else your patent will not be given. And so these mechanisms are good for now, because at the moment, my key challenge with these mechanisms is they don't actually recognise Indigenous rights to plants and fungi. And this is where they fall short, and this is why, when they are applied, they must be applied with the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. So it's really important that we ensure that not only do we have protective mechanisms available to protect plants, in particular coca, if we're talking about this in this situation, to ensure that the traditional Indigenous people's rights to self-determination with these plants is installed as a central factor in ecological harm reduction. And it can only be done when countries are recognising the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And then they have to work in unified enforcement with ILO conventions, which are labour right conventions, especially if traditional and Indigenous growers want to participate in the legal market. It is really important that there are transitional frameworks to ensure that they have options, to ensure that if they want to participate, they can. If they don't want to participate and want to maintain their coca use for traditional use, this also must be protected. And for those who wish to just get out of the industry completely and want to potentially transition into cocoa or anything else, that they also have that right protected. Because there are multiple different perspectives on how people want to utilise coca, and there should also then be community-led conflict navigation frameworks where it creates spaces for these different communities and uses to have conversations with each other in a safe space in order to ensure that all of those needs are met. And that's really important. So, what are the roles of the government? Well, the state. I want to come back to something that our previous moderator said. The state actually needs to participate. The state needs to ensure that they redistribute funds from criminalisation into ecological harm reduction, because as Steve mentioned before, prohibition is just a waste of money. And the political participation for Indigenous peoples and marginalised communities must be accessible. Don't just put it out there, make it accessible. Independent oversight bodies need to be put in place to ensure that the state are following with their own recommendations. The co-design and co-governance models for climate resilient development needs to be part of ecological harm reduction in terms of how is a regulated industry going to move forward with climate resilient development in mind. We have to look at the prohibition and legal market cannot be one captured system to another, and Indigenous and community-led restorative justice frameworks have to coincide. So my colleague Diego mentioned before, we have to ensure that we're having conversations about the intergenerational trauma and able to proceed through with whatever solutions we are bringing into an ecological harm reduction framework. And so just to conclude, these are the aspirations that we have for ecological harm reduction. If we initiate all of my recommendations that I made before, we will be able to create legal mechanisms to uphold ecological rights and to protect environmental land defenders, for community-led regenerative agriculture, to restrict biopiracy and prohibited plants associated with biological heritage, restoration rights for biological heritage and corporate capture, open research grants for Indigenous and traditional use and development of biological heritage, climate resilient development and ecological restoration, support for communities to transition into their chosen economies, housing first accessible treatment, community and capacity development, protection for workers in at-risk industries. We don't often talk about those captured in the drug trade system that every day have to live their life in danger. We have to ensure we're looking after these people. To expedite titling and demarcation waivers and community-led conflict mediation. And in particularly in a legal drug market, we must protect plants and fungi from corporate capture. I cannot stress this enough, really. We need to restrict corporate land grabbing and expansion in a regulated industry because, as Steve says, you know, in some cases we may have to be challenged by current business models which call for expansion, and we have to ensure that we put a nail in that. Community-led transitional frameworks for participation or non-participation. Collective benefit sharing arrangements, as I talked before, percentages of taxed revenue from a legal economy into community development and into climate resilient development and ecological restoration, labour rights and integrations of licence criteria. I really want to push this because I want people who are involved in the Indigenous and traditional space to actually have a part, not just in a future market, but in designing what it looks like, and in impacting the criteria of what it is to participate. Restorative justice from extractive and exploitative drug economies, that's going to be a tricky one, but I think it's very important to have frameworks to do this. Robust agrarian reform, and I'm going to finish by putting this quote up. I probably should have finished minutes ago, but I won't answer one of the questions and take up that time. You know, protecting nature is more than just saving the planet. It's securing a resilient future for generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We've got about 15 minutes left, and so what I plan to do while you're thinking of your questions is I'm going to just put out a question to the panel and ask them to just comment on it while you're thinking, right? So we've got some incredibly propositional ideas from this panel, which I really love. You know, we've not just analysed the problem, we've actually come up with ideas. I want to hear from you as to what do you think are the obstacles to moving forward? Because it's taken us so long to get to even this point. What are the major obstacles that you would say exist to trying to change policy and understanding? And I link that to a question which you can either answer or not, which is, it seems to me we need new pedagogies for getting people to understand this problematic. And if you've got any ideas on that, I'd be also interested. Yeah, so do you want to start with you, Kelly? Yeah.
Hi, great question. I'm just going to give an example of what our coalition did this year. We created an exhibition where we brought 10 stakeholders in the coca and cocaine economy to life. We created these huge cubes that people could walk around and learn about each stakeholder. And those stakeholders included the coca leaf, a young boy who worked in the cocaine laboratory, a port official, a river, the jaguar, the coca leaf itself. And all of these narratives are written with testimony and combined so that we didn't put anybody in danger. And we wrote them from the first person. I, the jaguar, I, the coca leaf. And we described the impacts of prohibition. And then at the end of the exhibition, when people walked around and read and learned about each of these stakeholders, we invited each member of the public to write policy for each stakeholder. We asked them to identify what harms prohibition impacted onto them and how law could address those harms. So the reason I'm sharing the example of an exhibition which has toured 2 cities in Colombia and is now having a 3-month residency in Sao Paulo is because we have to get this into the cultural space. It is jammed in the academic and scientific space. The climate movement is a very sexy movement, Okay, it's what most people are talking about in primary schools all over the world. So everybody understands the crisis and the climate crisis we're in. Nobody is talking about drugs, and maybe other people can talk about why they're not talking about drugs. But we need to flip that narrative, and we need to bring the artists, we need to bring the advocates to work together across silos, across sectors, share their skill sets, bring our Indigenous colleagues to help design interesting ways of rethinking how law is created, because this is all about law. It is man-made, human-made, and we can unmake it. So when we repeal law, we need to be part of the process of redesigning what that law looks like. And our coalition is committed to doing that creatively, not just academically.
Wow, we're making drug policy sexy.
Yeah, Steve.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think we're looking at, I mean, in terms of the obstacles, I think we're looking at, generations of entrenched drug war narratives where drugs and drug producers and sellers and users have been posed as a threat, and the fight against them has been in these very kind of moral binary, very kind of warrior-like language, a war on drugs. And the word evil it's in the 1961 convention. Drugs are said as an evil we must combat. That's the language in the convention. So you've got these moral binaries and war language in the founding document of the global drug control regime, and it's a lot to get past, because if you're fighting evil, it's like you're fighting zombies or Nazis or something. Yeah. They're bad. You got to shoot them. You don't need evidence. It's righteous in itself. You're fighting an evil invading army threat. We have a threat to our children and our communities. So getting past those kind of deeply entrenched moral binary narratives of the war on drugs is really, really difficult. I think, having said that, I think we are getting there. I mean, you have seen amazing progress with cannabis regulation, for example. 10 years ago, nowhere had legalized and regulated cannabis. Today, 45 jurisdictions, including jurisdictions on every continent, about 500 million people, 500 million people living in legal cannabis jurisdictions now. Change is possible and it is happening. And I think in many ways, the cannabis debate, even though cannabis is a lot less threatening than something like cocaine, and it's not as scary, it's opening up space because people understanding the arguments. They're seeing the benefits of regulation. They're getting into a more pragmatic mindset, which is, okay, yeah, the war on drugs doesn't work. What do we do instead? That's where the debate's moved, and it's moved from this kind of very moral space into a much more pragmatic space. And we're seeing this institutional support that I was referring to, like the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, like Amnesty International, like world leaders like the President of Colombia talking about the problems with the war on drugs. We are moving from the margins into the mainstream. It's now a high-level, credible position to have for member states and NGOs and UN agencies. So I remain optimistic. The question really is, how do we do it right? Because the danger is that you do it and then you screw it up. And you have British American Tobacco and Diageo and Pfizer and whatnot take over the legal drug industry, and they're just as exploitative and awful as Alcon Tobacco and Big Pharma. And in many ways, it can be just as bad as prohibition in some respects. So the question really now is, how do we do it and how do we make it happen, but how do we make sure it happens in the right way that meets our shared aspirations in terms of public health and human rights and sustainable development. And that's why it's really, really important that everyone gets involved in this debate now, because this is the moment at the beginning of this conversation journey where you can start to lay the ground rules and the foundations solidly in the kind of principles that we all want to see.
No, great, and I like the optimistic note, but I also heard Anthony, and I'm also very aware of the bombing of boats in the Caribbean at the moment. Yeah, so there's an urgency, isn't there? Yes, so Jenna, so obstacles and possible pedagogies.
Yeah, there's no surprise that it's Indigenous and marginalised communities that are disproportionately impacted by prohibition. In New Zealand, 50% of the prison system is made up of Māori men, and Māori make 17% of the population. But the interesting thing is that 50% of that 50% are in prison for drug-related offences. So we have to really look at the fact that prohibition is another form of colonial imposition. And so this is one reason why so many institutes want it to stay in place. They want it to continue. They want it to be utilised as this kind of mechanism. I think the second thing, which is important work that we're trying to bring up in the International Coalition for Drug Policy Reform and Environmental Justice, are the environmental impacts of prohibition. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody is understanding the impact of the reinvestment of illegal gold mining into extraction industries, which are destroying some of our most biodiverse areas of nature in the world, and not at a small rate. I mean, the recent report by World Wildlife basically talked about that in Latin America, 90% of indigenous species are in decline in the last 20 years. Exactly. And so it's really important for us to bring visualization to just how much prohibition is contributing not only to climate change, deforestation, but it is supporting and upholding these industries because it contributes to the global GDP. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, if we don't ensure, we need to ensure this is visible, so there is no way it can continue to be ignored and brushed under the carpet.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you for being nice and short in all of this. Let's have a few questions. Yes. Yes. And I'm going to take a few questions and then ask the panel to respond, so, you know, we get as many
As
as
you
possible.
talk about how this money for illegal drugs go to other business like illegal gold mining, I would like to invite you all to see an installation in the Victoria and Albert Museum in the photography section in the Solo Room of Juan Covelli, a Colombian artist that denounced the state of the Atrato River, one that was subject of one of the judgment that you mentioned before. So please, let's go and see it.
Yeah, we'll go round and then I'll ask you to
Thank you.
final comments. Yeah? Yes. Yeah, over here.
That wasn't a question.
No.
So thank you all for some very provocative and important points. I wanted to ask you about something that we haven't mentioned, which is the role of law enforcement. So law enforcement has a primary role in all of this. It is very much a source of harm as well due to drug policy. And in as much as, yes, we do need to move away from prohibition, we're still far away from getting away from it. So whilst we are under prohibition, do you see a way of transforming the role of law enforcement into a way that they can contribute to minimizing harms, be it environmental harms, be it harms to community, so that we can start to heal this trauma that we've all talked about?
Thank you. Let's just have the, like the end there while, we're on that row.
There was
We'll come back. So if we just have that question, then we'll come back to you. Yeah. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Well, it's I don't know if it's a question. It's more some comments about the talks. I am Mateo Luna. I'm Colombian. I used to work for the government in multiple tasks. Once with the Defense Ministry, Human Rights and International Human Law. And then after more than 2 years with the peace process implementation in Colombia, in rural reform, with the ART, Agencia de Renovación del Territorio. So, and I'm finishing a master here in the Glasgow University in globalization and economic history. And all my research was in Coca and all my previous experience as well. And I'm wondering, like, I came here very excited and I came to realize it's like the same topics that we have already discussed hundreds of years ago. For example, I mean, in the 80s and in the 70s and in the late 19th century, it was about health, cocaine and health, right? It was the health crisis. In the 80s, 90s, 2000s, it was development. And now it's environment. So we always go to these cycles and we never solve the problem. So what's the solution? Legalization? Yes. Then gold and diamonds are legal. And how many illegal groups still profit from that? I mean, we already have talked about many topics, but nobody addresses to the white elephant in the room. That's the illegal groups. You were talking about the Plan Colombia. Plan Colombia was not against drugs, was to strengthen the Colombian military. And in that sense, it worked. We signed a peace process agreement in 2015. So, and who is paying for the legalization? The NHS? We all know how the NHS is doing. Or is Colombia paying again, and Bolivia and Peru? So I think giving the drug or coca this legalization path is betraying our people here from the indigenous communities, the native people who have different drugs, or not drugs, coca, sorry, that's completely different than cocaine, for thousands of years. Coca has never been illegal in the US, for example. And we have to thank that to Coca-Cola, because they assure that. And nowadays they import coca leaf from Peru, and they have done it since the late 19th century.
Yeah, we've got to get on to another question, but thank you.
Sorry, but
no,
I have a lot of points. But
no, it's very interesting.
Just to think about it.
Yeah, great, thank you. No, thank you. I just have Oscar here, and then we'll go up there. Yep.
I don't think we're going to have time for everybody to answer all the
No,
questions. So
no,
I just
we
kind of
won't,
like
but
pick one and answer it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's nice to hear the questions.
Yeah,
and just
exactly.
quickly, this is Oscar from Kew Gardens. You mentioned Steve, and Jenna, and also Anthony about like potential bioprospection, right? But how bioprospection, like using coca and derivatives for a market, right? But how can we really ensure that there is not going to be like big companies, as it had happened before with Jahe, for example, to take over? How do you envision benefit sharing, especially when indigenous communities have different views? I mean, as Ati said, some indigenous communities, they don't see the coca leaf being commercialized. Some others, they do, like the Fabiola Piñacue, for example. That's my question.
Yeah, thank you. And there's one up here, and I perhaps two last ones.
I would say I would say that we would just maybe hold these ones, and because I think we have to.
Okay, yeah. So just that last one, yeah. Sorry, I did promise him. Can't break my promise. And then yes, just short comments from the panel. Yeah.
Just a quick question for you, Steve. When you talk about legalization for cocaine, right? One part is the safe side, like coca leaves. The other one is like pharmaceutical one, right? But most of the consumers of cocaine are for recreative, like life, light knife, or this kind of things. So what is the approach on that when you think about legalization? You know what I'm saying? Like you can have like prescriptions when you are already addicted or something like that. When you just want to go to party, like a lot of people just doing it for that. What is the approach for that? Because I think 99% of the people that consume that is for that reason.
Yeah. So 5 minutes more, just to, yeah.
Literally in total 5 minutes more.
Yeah, yeah. We're only 5 minutes later than our time, so we're doing very well. So Jen, do you want to start this time? Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I'm going to address Oscar's question because this is something that I have a very special interest in. So the protection of biological heritage, and that's not just the plant itself, but it's the knowledge associated with the plant, is incredibly important if we're looking at an independent industry. Some of those treaties that I mentioned before are the beginning processes to intellectual property rights around plants and their associated biological heritage. I think the biggest issue is that current patent processes only are available for individual patent process. And as we know, that a lot of plants and the associated knowledge is a collective knowledge system. It's collectively cared for. It's under collective guardianship of the communities. How do we create collective rights which are recognised in the intellectual property space when they don't exist yet? But what's worse is if we don't participate in the current processes, someone else can and will come in and take that away. And this happened with us in New Zealand in the Manuka honey industry. We had the Australian Manuka honey industry that were trying to utilise the word Manuka because Manuka is a very valuable product. And we actually lost that battle in the intellectual property rights court because they utilised the Oxford Dictionary definition in order to utilise the word Manuka and appropriate certain elements of it, even though the Manuka does not grow in Australia. So I think the most important question that you bring up, and for me is a huge focus of my work, is how do we create collective protective mechanisms that are legally recognized in a process that traditional users and indigenous users and communities can not only design and participate in within their own space, their own time, their own narratives, but how do we create these processes, but also somehow participate in existing processes in the meantime, and I hate that we have to do this, in order to protect our biological heritage. Because in particular, we're talking about coca here. There's a huge risk in the current patent climate that someone can literally just come in and patent particular compounds of coca and alienate that compound from the use from those communities in which have a biological, kinship connection. It's a really good question, and it's something that I'm still trying to figure out, but I hope that helps.
Steve.
Just quickly on one of your points, which was around the armed groups. I'm not suggesting that legalizing cocaine in Colombia or anywhere else is going to, resolve all of the issues. It's not going to save the environment in and of itself. It's not going to, there are multiple problems associated with the legal market. What it does is it reduces some of the structural drivers of those problems. It means that those armed groups will have less money to buy arms. It means that there'll be less fighting over money because there's less money there'll be less money going around. It means that there will be less incentives to destroy the environment or to invest in extractive industries. It creates space for civic infrastructure to begin to rebuild. So it's not a solution to all of those things, but it reduces or eliminates one of the key drivers of many of those development issues, and it creates space for solutions to start to happen. So it's not, I don't think it's a magic bullet, but it's a critical enabler of a process of institutional building on multiple fronts.
Thank you very much. Yes, last word.
Last word. I think that the fundamental is the word land. Land. As we are entering this climate crisis, it is going to be about land. And at the moment, who runs the cocaine economy runs the territory. And we need to split that and bring it into the cultural domain and out of these hidden spaces. And we need to become equipped and comfortable talking about these intersecting issues. But fundamentally, at the heart of all of this, of course, it's the plant, but it's also land. And that is what this crisis is going to be about. Sorry, that's a really difficult thing to land and finish this event on, but it is really important that we speak to people who aren't convinced, and it is important. Just really quickly on a lot of the colleagues that we work with are police officers who are now coming and standing up and saying the war on drugs is completely and utterly futile. Our prisons are full of people who shouldn't be in prison, while sex offenders are not in prison. So we also need to speak to the people who are in these spaces, and I believe we can only do that in collaboration and coalition.
Fantastic. Thank you. Wonderful panel. Thank you very much.
No more words. Thank you for everybody just for staying so long. I know everybody's hungry, so thank you. Eat.
Fantastic. Absolutely.
Through science and academic creation, we must imagine and build new horizons beyond stigma and war. We Colombians are tired of war, and we think that the war against drugs has been imposed on us, and we should terminate this kind of stigmatization. Thank you.